to prevent communities. And that was because all across the world, at that time, that was the only way we could stop this pandemic in its tracks. From then to now, and so as a result of that, schools across this country, across levels, across grades, were closed. From then to now, the world has responded in the way we know human beings and the resilience that we show across countries and continents, ethnicities, religions, genders. We respond generally as a human race with alacrity, innovation, and resilience. And that's what the world did regarding COVID-19. As a result of which, many vaccines were developed by different bodies, agencies, and countries. We now have a different picture in August 2021. And that is, there is another way we can stop community spread. There is another way we can cut this virus at its knees and end it, actually. And there's definitely a way that we could stop the effects of the virus. And that is by using the vaccines. Administering the vaccines, accessing the vaccines, having people take the vaccines. And so the urgent necessity in 2020 to close schools regardless of what the impact was known and how it could have been predicted, we no longer are in those circumstances now. Studies across the world, not only during this period, but before, and particularly in relation to school closures about COVID and for COVID, studies across the world by various internationally renowned bodies, UNICEF, UNESCO, the World Bank, individual countries, are saying very clearly to us, the longer we stay out of school, the more likely we are to suffer from severe learning loss and premature school leaving. Severe learning loss simply means, it's a very brief explanation for a very severe thing. And what it means is that there is severe loss of learning that children had acquired. Children who knew certain concepts will forget them. Children who had acquired certain skills will lose those skills. And the longer we stay out of school, the more exacerbated that will become. Premature school leaving means dropout. We know that in Guyana is the phenomenon of dropouts. We had begun since 2013 to do very well, recognized in the Latin American region for doing the best in terms of how we were arresting that issue. If we were to stay out of school, it is unlikely that Guyana is going to be able to defy any of the predictions of the world's studies on the issue of school closing and staying out of school. When, like I said, when we closed our school doors, there was no other way to do this. There is now a way. Fortunately, in Guyana, we have the access through intense government effort and spending. We have access to very many different vaccines, and we particularly now have access to vaccines that could be used and will be used in the age cohort of 12 to 18. We no longer, therefore, have the same circumstances that could allow us to keep schools closed when we know what the impact will be. Having said that, we still have COVID in our midst. And so it can't be a throwing open of the school doors and saying all will return to normal as we were in January 2020 or February 2020. We are still mandated by the Ministry of Health to observe all the COVID protocols, mask wearing, distancing, sanitizing frequently. And we will be doing that. What we are here to have our parents know and our teachers know is how we will reopen for each level. As we said before, reopening will look very differently than it did in September 2019 for the 2019-2020 year. And reopening will look differently for different schools at different levels. It may look different even for the same levels, same nursery in the same region. So one nursery school may open one way and another one may open another way. You will hear in detail this afternoon how each school will reopen and what our plan is to counter what we know happened, the learning loss, as well as to arrest the likelihood of dropouts. And you will hear that from each level head this afternoon, after which we would be happy to answer questions based on anything we said today. On the issue specifically of secondary education, you will hear school by school from the Assistant Chief Education Officer, secondary. But the secondary schools will reopen to face-to-face learning as the vaccination is rolled out. So I want to just be very clear about that. All schools will reopen on the 6th of September. The school term begins on the 6th of September, but secondary schools will reopen as the vaccine rolls out. And so even as you hear the individual plans for secondary schools, that will take effect only once the vaccine program has been rolled out by the Ministry of Health, who is working in collaboration with the Ministry of Education. I thank you and hand you back over to our chairperson.
Thank you very much, Minister. At this time, I invite to the podium the Director of NSERD, Ms. Kunita Waldron-Lewis, to give us remarks on the consolidated curriculum and the diagnostic assessment. Ms. Waldron.
Thank you, our chairperson. All protocol being observed. Good afternoon to Honorable Minister, PS, CEO, fellow officers, and members of the media and our public at large. Now, the approach that the ministry has taken is one out of necessity to strategize and consider how curriculum aligned primary and secondary education can continue to be effectively provided on an ongoing basis, making every effort to ensure Guyanese students are not unduly disadvantaged by COVID-19. And the cornerstone solution is the consolidated curriculum. Now, the consolidated curriculum is a shared vision of how teaching and learning are to unfold and ensure students are on track after such a prolonged period away from school doors, from at-home learning. And it's to be utilized nationally. It is an effort to support teachers and to reduce their stress as it relates to school level programming of learning. And it's designed to resemble what is already familiar to them. That is their termly schemes. It allows for adjustments to timelines for students' learning. So this is important because based on data emanating from the Guyana Diagnostic Assessment, which I will also treat with in turn, we are looking at where our students left off, and trying to work our way back up to standard. So we are trying to, in a very cohesive way, reach back and think about where students ended their academic journey, and then try to work our way forward towards where they need to be by grade level. So this is a response to support continued learning by providing clear guidance to teachers in language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies, as it relates to content, teaching and learning strategies, and assessment strategies as children learn. Now, it's important to identify very clearly what the consolidated curriculum is not. It is not a new or different curriculum. This is the same curriculum that our teachers are exposed to and experienced with. However, it is a tightening or streamlining of the existing national curriculum. What it also is not is a compromised curriculum. So it's not a watering down of students' learning expectations or outcomes. The grade level objectives are very well preserved across the different levels and within subjects. Now, what is the process here? The consolidated curriculum was done across the 4 core content areas: language arts, math, science, social studies. And it was done for provisioning for grades 1 through 9. Because as you know, for grade 10 and 11, this is where we pick up on the CSEC curriculum in preparation for those exit exams. Now, how did we do this? The subject-specific topics and objectives were reviewed, and opportunities for logical connections were assessed, and if appropriate, integration occurred. So for example, if you're teaching handwriting, this was a timetabled subject, and it could be merged or integrated during composition as another timetabled area. So now, even as the children write their stories, they are practicing the art of handwriting. Make sense? Right. Now, the objectives, the learning objectives, were assessed for duplication. Was the duplication necessary? Was it deliberate? So were the methods and strategies. Now here, the evaluation of these objectives centered around whether or not something could be deleted and not impact the students' learning because it was covered in a previous year. As you know, our curriculum is heavily spiraled in nature, so you experience some concepts and content year after year after year. So if there's sufficient coverage in preceding years, we may make the choice to remove it because we know the children have had sufficient practice at it. Likewise, if something is developmentally inappropriate for a younger year level, we may remove it from that grade and expose the children to it at a subsequent grade. But either way, the take-home message here is that the outcomes are still preserved according to the children's developmental trajectory. We've also restructured or moved some of the objectives from the streams to the next grade level if the curriculum documents allowed for this to occur, without negatively impacting student achievement. Now, also in cases where strands existed within the curriculum, efforts were made to align these concepts within clusters of related objectives. So in the present curriculum, problem solving is treated as a standalone. But now, which makes more developmental and experiential sense for children, it's integrated across all of the different math strands. So you would practice problem solving in number sense and notation, practice problem solving in data management. So children begin to get more and more experience with the critical thinking skills they'd need to be successful later on. Sound strategy, don't you think? Yes. Okay. And finally, a very key take-home point here is we were able to, at each grade level, truncate or compress the curriculum from the 32 to 38 week offering into 20-week packages. So this is a significant point because it means that, for example, a child going into grade 4 would have missed grade 3 due to the pandemic, or they might not have had consistent educational engagement of the grade level before. So the grade 4 educator will have at hand the grade 3 consolidated curriculum as well as the grade 4 consolidated curriculum. So based on the results of the diagnostic assessment, the teacher knows what is the appropriate entry point for her group of learners or his group of learners. So if you have children who have had overwhelming contact, virtual engagement worked for them, and you do their diagnostic assessments and it shows that they've hit all of the learning outcomes for grade 3 or missed on a few of them, then that teacher has an easier path to go back to where the children stopped, come to grade level, and then push forward. But in the situation where a lot of our students are faced with, where they did not have that consistent engagement, the results of the diagnostic assessment lets the teacher know how far back she needs to start in grade 3's work and then plot the course forward. Now, some might argue, what happens if they don't finish grade 4? Let's say for argument's sake. Guess what? When they get to grade 5, which grade level are they beginning with? 4. So they have another opportunity to get that content again. And then we continue the cycle. So our teachers will have been trained on how to navigate and utilize the consolidated curriculum, conduct grade level appropriate Guyana diagnostic assessments, which I'll discuss in a little more detail shortly, and based on the analysis and results of the GDA, determine the programmatic entry point for teaching and learning for the class and individual students if significant deficits are detected. Teachers will use the consolidated curriculum from the prior grade level, just to reiterate, based on where children are, then plot a course forward to meeting grade level expectations. So that is the overview of the consolidated curriculum. Yes, sure. Yes. Now, the Guyana Diagnostic Assessment was crafted to do more than address our minds to what Guyanese children have lost. I mean, Minister talked about learning loss. Our perspective is a little bit more optimistic in outlook because we seek to measure empirically what a learner knows or can do, which will inform what the learner needs to know next. When we think in terms of lost learning and gaps and the need to catch up, diagnostic assessment is focused on what learners can't do. And this is a demotivating re-entry point for both educators and learners. The Guyana Diagnostic Assessment is a two-part assessment that looks at both the learner's psychosocial state and general well-being, and their attitudes towards returning to the learning space, as well as the academic or cognitive funds of knowledge that learners come back to school with. So we are looking both at answering questions around what kind of knowledge and experiences these children come back to school with that could potentially impact their learning. Being in a COVID environment has been very stressful, not just for the adults, but for the students as well. And perhaps that could have a negative impact on their view of school. That may be a solution or one of the things to look for why children are now staying away from school longer based on the pandemic. So the part one is an information gathering conversation that will help build faster rapport between the teacher and the student. and it helps the educator to create learner profiles. And the necessity of a learner profile is that it gives you a look or a peep into the social life of the child, their educational engagement during the pandemic, attitudes towards school and learning. Perhaps some children may carry fear about going into a clustered environment. And the child's own self-appraisal of his or herself as a learner. And now this is important as well, because it speaks to attitude, it speaks to motivation, it speaks to drive. Now, part 2 is the content-specific assessments as they relate to language arts and math. So there is no diagnostic assessment for science or social studies. Language arts and math as the core educational competencies. And it seeks to answer questions around what are students' essential understandings about the key strands and components of a specific subject area. The part 2 is aligned to the national curriculum. And this looks at the expectations for each grade level and try to see how children have measured up. So, for example, if one of the exit standards for grade 3 or grade 4 math may be data management, can they read a pie chart or a histogram? The diagnostic assessment will look at an exemplar or an example from when you're leaving grade 3 to see if children can handle it. So it's not anything new that is made to trick them or trip them up, because it's based on things they should have been exposed to in the previous year. So it looks at what the child should know. Also, it has a very short subject-specific learner survey about children's feelings about the particular subject. Do you think that you're a good writer? How do you know what a good writer is? All before the children actually start to write. Or how do you feel about mathematics? Do you like mathematics? If yes, why? If no, why not? Before the children actually enter into mathematical concepts. Because it gives, again, a perspective of the learner's mindset. Because apart from knowing the content, you also need to know what's driving the child in that particular area. So overall, just to wrap up, the key features of the Guyana Diagnostic Assessment are that there are easy to follow scripts for teachers that can be adjusted based on the knowledge of the child and the context. Most items are oral in nature, so they don't overly tax children. There is no penalty for using home language, whether it's your indigenous language or Creolese. There's no penalty for that. In fact, it's encouraged, because you want children to communicate with you in the most natural way possible. Some items can be done as a whole class activity, so this takes some of the pressure off of the teacher as well. And the scoring is simple and user-friendly, which makes evaluation of the results easier. There are student response booklets that every child will have, and this can be shared with not only the parents and primary caregivers, but the children themselves. Because you want to develop strong homeschool partnerships from the very beginning. So this is something concrete or evidential that you can use to discuss the child's trajectory for that year. And it's very learner-centered. And finally, it's an excellent opportunity for teachers and students to bond one-on-one. Because these are, of course, very extenuating circumstances and times. So you need to build that trust between educator and tutee from the outset. And this is our solution to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director, for excellently explaining how the ministry plans to use the consolidated curriculum and the diagnostic assessment to address the needs of the sector this time. At this moment, I'd like to invite the Chief Education Officer within the Ministry of Education, Dr. Marcel Hudson, to deliver remarks.
Thank you, Sessional Chair. Honorable Minister, Dr. Premani Chan, Permanent Secretary, Mr. Alfred King, other distinguished members at the head table, Ms. Quinita Waldron, Samantha Williams, Junan Gonzalez, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, and those who are watching us, good afternoon. I would want to begin by saying that, and you may have heard this before, the easiest thing for us to do is to say that we are in a battle and we are losing and therefore we should give up or we should wait and see how things will pan out. And that is not leadership. Leadership is about fighting even in a crisis and arriving at the best solutions to treat with a problem. And so we have a problem. We are in a pandemic, and therefore at the Ministry of Education we just didn't sit down and say this is tough. It is easy to say, you know, we're not ready and we're not doing anything and so on, but when you wear the hat, then you begin to understand the kind of work people have to do to get us to where we are. We have come a very long way, and there is no secret about that. We had developed a plan of action for the reopening of schools at the level of grades 10 and 11, the CSEC children, and we have seen how that turned out. Our children went on to do extremely well at the level of CSEC and CAPE, even in the midst of a pandemic, and because we had a plan. And we did not see any of our children really suffering to the point of death or anything like that, but we actually saw them rising above the fray. And so what we have done again, because the intention is to open the schools at the other levels, that's nursery, primary, and secondary, and therefore we have crafted a plan again. We are by no means suggesting that it is the most fantastic thing we have done and everything will work well and so on. That's not how life works. And I think all of us sitting in this room and those who are listening to us, you know that. There's no magic about what you're doing. It's just that we have to plan our work and work our plan. And therefore, the COVID-19 pandemic around the world would have affected us in the education sector around the world. And we have seen UNICEF, UNESCO, PAO, different ones, as Minister made mention of, they were indicating the impact, the kind of loss our children will experience in terms of their own developmental trajectory and ultimately the nation. Think about a nation where we have people locked away for more than 2 years and not being educated. So we want to say that we are in a fight for the soul of this nation, because a nation with persons who are not educated is a nation that is going no place. And so we have to look at the pros and cons. And we will not see the manifestation of the impact now if we continue to have our doors closed. A couple of years down, some education psychologists they say that we'll see this thing, the impact of this in the next 4 or 5 years. Anything that begins now to fix. But we hope to leapfrog and to really change the dynamics. Think about children who can't read. We have the nursery, and we'll hear about that. We have children operating at the nursery level. We have children at the primary level, and they've not been in school and in the early grades of the secondary. While we did a number of things, worksheets, booster programs, the use of a number of things that we did that really stood the test of time, but nothing beats face-to-face learning. The literature is clear on that. And therefore, the time is now. So we have no choice. And we have no choice for several reasons. What the literature says, because we don't want to degenerate into a nation of doom. And generally, the people of this nation, they want this. The people want the schools to be reopened. We've had several Zoom meetings with thousands of parents and teachers and so on, who are saying, look, we have to get back. And I'm happy that those persons are seeing the light. We had teachers who agree. How will we tell our teachers and our teachers and parents who want to go back to school that they can't go back to school? We can't do that. It is not. That's not a logical thing to do. The manifestation yesterday, if you pass by Saints, you will see parents who just heard that we are going to be vaccinating students. They did not give their names. We had the names for some 109 or something like that persons. And before the day is out, we vaccinated over 200 and something students. Parents just brought their children because they want to be in school. And so we have no choice. And so it is incumbent that we move in this direction. What we need to make this work is the unfettered support of all our stakeholders. I don't think now is the time for bickering and fighting, because the lives of our children are at stake. And that is why it is very important that we move in this direction. So we've crafted a plan, and you'll hear from the nursery, primary, and secondary sector how that plan will roll out. So this is not something, it's not a case where we don't know what we're doing. We know what we're doing. It is a case that we've never been here before, but we have a plan, and you'll hear how that plan will actually pan out. I just want to speak quickly on the issue of assessments. For now, the National Grades 2, 4, 9 assessment for the academic year 2021, July 2022, we have taken a stance that it is no point going in that direction because our students have not been exposed the way we would like them to be exposed. And so it might not be a logical thing to have those examinations executed at this point in time. Learners entering grades 2 and 4, 9, they may not have effectively completed the curriculum, and therefore these are some of the reasons. The National Grade 6 assessment, however, will be written in, tentatively these dates have been set for the 6th and 7th of July, and all learners will be tested on the concepts, as the Director of NSERD made mention of, the consolidated curriculum. So we hope not to put any child at a disadvantage, and for that we will. And when we talk about primary, we'll talk about some more specifics in terms of that. But we're hoping that the children who are going into the examination classes, like the grade 6 and the CSEC classes, that they will be out every day. And it's nothing new for the grades 10 and 11. They were out every day, and they have done well generally. And we will also have. Well, Ms. Waldron spoke about the diagnostic assessment tools, and I think she did an excellent job on that. So it is not just we go in and start to teach and paint everybody with the same brush, as she would have alluded to. We would need to know where our children are at before we actually execute the curriculum. The Honorable Minister had made a promise to those teachers who worked diligently during the vacation period, and a promise was made to them, and that promise will be kept. So they will not return to school until the 4th, I think, of October. So they have an entire month. In other words, what we attempted to do is to give them back the time that they generously give. And I say generous because they could have adopted a parcel like many others and don't worry with our children and with what we do at the Ministry of Education. So it's only fair that they're rewarded, they're honored, that they are recognized. And so we have students who will be awaiting the results, marking and so on is going on right now. And so they're awaiting the results of the examination. And those results may not be out until somewhere around the end of October. But they too will be engaged by the various means that we have, the Learning Channel and meetings, Zoom meetings, and some classes online and so on. And they will be doing some of the work that they normally would do after the grade 6 assessment, where they kind of have content that will help them to make that transition into the secondary school. So I just wanted to say that we're not operating in a vacuum, and we hope that we will receive the kind of support going on. I think it is said, the psychologist tells us that from grades 1 to 3, you learn to read. And after then, you read to learn. Think about those children who have not had any education. Learning to read is one thing. And if you learn to read, you now have to read to learn, because really and truly, we don't want our children to be playing catch-up all the time. And therefore, the time is now for us to have these doors reopened. Of course, observing the strictest of COVID-19 protocols, like we have done when we had opened the secondary school doors for the upper grades. So initially, these are my remarks, and I just want you to know that we're not dreaming. We are collaborating with all our stakeholders, teachers, parents, and anyone who has ideas as to how we could help and go forward. We are well open to those kinds of things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hudson. Making it very clear that the Ministry of Education does have a plan, and that we need the support of all stakeholders to make it work. As we're speaking about plans, we will now give specific focus to the 3 sectors, and we will start with our nursery sector. I invite Ms. Samantha Williams, our Assistant Chief Education Officer for Nursery.
Thank you to our chairperson. Please allow me to use the already established protocol. Good afternoon to our listening public and all of our parents, of course, who are eager to hear the plans for the reopening of school across all levels. The nursery education sector is pleased to announce the return to school for our nursery-age children in safe, protected, and conducive spaces. The importance of the return for our babies is embedded in the psychology of learning, which purports that the 0 to 7 years are perhaps the most crucial stage of development of a young child. If early literacy, numeracy, and life skills are not embedded in the early years of development, it is likely that these learners will experience delays and setbacks in their lifelong learning. More so, research has shown that citizens who attended nursery schools are likely to graduate from university, own their own homes, maintain and attract better paying jobs, and the list goes on. I'm sure if I were to pause and to do a poll right now to find out how many of us in this space attended nursery school, I would see that all of our hands will go up. So the research is well poised. I just want to say that the prolonged home confinement during this disease outbreak can have and has had negative impacts on our children's physical and mental health. Children can sometimes become less active, they will have irregular sleep patterns and less favorable diets, and on many occasions, they will not be able to interact effectively with other children or benefit from outdoor activities. The return to school for nursery level must be nestled in strict compliance with COVID-19 measures and the contextual reality of each school to reinforce same. It is against this premise that schools were guided and encouraged to prepare individualized operational plans that will take into account the available physical space, the number of learners, and the number of teachers. So, on September 6, 2021, 41 of our 348 nursery schools will open their doors to full face-to-face engagement for learners, while the other 307 will operate on a rotation system. This rotation system will see Year 1 and Year 2 learners attending school on different days during the week. Therefore, parents are asked to check with their respective schools for more information on the days when their children or ward are expected to be in school. And more so, the Ministry of Education will publish shortly a listing of all 348 nursery schools showing the system of operation, whether it's full-time or rotation, as well as the days when the different classes are expected to be at school. For all nursery schools, however, the contact time with teachers and learners should not be less than 2 hours per day or 4 hours per week. We recognize at the nursery level that it is important for us to partner with parents as we continue the learning journey for all of our children. And so it is against this premise that we have decided to allow our children to be at school for no less than 4 hours per week. We believe that the 4-hour instruction, along with the parental support, will be adequate to help our children to acquire those basic early literacy, numeracy, and life skills. On the return to school, the ratio of teacher to pupils should not exceed 1 teacher to 5 learners. And this is to ensure that we can supervise our children as we provide that necessary instruction that is needed. The instructional program, as I would have indicated before, will be heavily focused on building literacy and numeracy skills and on teaching values and health and family life education. All nursery-age children will receive a home-based learning package that is provided by the Ministry of Education. This package will contain all the relevant resources that are needed for parents and teachers to be able to provide that quality education for our children. The home-based package will contain resources such as crayons, pencils, building blocks, wooden puzzles, flashcards, which will include letter cards, word cards, and numeral cards, Play-Doh, exercise books, activity books, and the list goes on. And this package is necessary because we know that we are operating under strict COVID-19 measures, and we want to avoid at all costs the sharing of resources. So we are ensuring that every child at the nursery level will have an individualized learning package that he or she will use. Now, school administrators are encouraged to ensure that a robust sanitation plan is in place so that surfaces are frequently sanitized. Additionally, PTAs can utilize vaccinated parents to assist with the monitoring and supervision of children while they are at schools. And teachers, of course, are expected to provide regular feedback sessions with parents so that they can feel supported and receive the necessary guidance so that they will be able to assist their children while they're at home. Parents, you are encouraged to take your children or ward to school on days when they are scheduled to do so, and to adhere to the strict pickup and drop-off times that all schools will enforce, and this is very necessary in order for us to avoid a high level of contamination. Parents, you are also encouraged to ensure that your children take their home-based learning package to school every day they are scheduled to be there. We do not want to have them sharing those pencils and crayons and all the other resources they use on a regular basis at school. Parents, you are encouraged, and this is very important, you are encouraged to ensure that you attend the weekly feedback session with teachers. This is very important because, as I said before, we are rolling out a plan that is heavily dependent on parent-school partnership. Our nursery babies are only going to be at school for 4 hours per week, minimum 4 hours per week. Therefore, parents, you have to attend these sessions so that the teachers can guide you on what you can do during the time when your learners are with you, when your children are with you. Parents, you are encouraged to talk with your children about going to school. This is very important. They will need to be able to transition and transition well. You need to talk to them about the importance of wearing a mask. And talking to them can be done by you sharing your own experience of attending nursery school. And the children, you have to encourage them not to borrow or touch other person's resources or masks. Now is the time to get our children to return to regular sleep routines. We know that over the pandemic, our children have been going to bed at different times during the night. But now, we need to get them to return to regular sleep routines so that they can adjust to getting up at earlier times. And I dare say that the research suggests that children between the ages of 0 to 8, they should have no less than 10 hours of sleep per day. So ensure that they're getting to bed by 8 in the evenings. Parents, you are also encouraged to ensure that your children can independently access their snack containers and their water and juice bottles. We know that sometimes you buy those really fancy things for your children and it's very difficult for them to open. I'm imploring you, keep it simple, keep it basic, and ensure that your children will be able to independently open those containers. We want to avoid, again, a high level of contamination. Parents, ensure that when you package your children's snack, that you use hassle-free or child-proof packaging so that it's easier for them to be able to retrieve same. And I want to also encourage our parents to ensure that your children remain at home on days when they are not feeling well. We know that some persons may want to treat the school system in a manner that it becomes a place where we can take our children and we can do things we need to do for a couple of hours. But we want to ensure that if your children are sick, you keep them at home. Do not bring them to school if they have a fever, runny nose, and you know all the other things that you need to look for. And last but by no means least, I want to say to our parents that you need to have regular talks with our children. Talk to them every day about ways in which they can continue to remain safe when they are in the school environment. I believe that if the parents and our head teachers and teachers work together, we can be able to deliver, or dare I say, continue to deliver quality nursery education to our nation's children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Williams. As we move along, we now focus on the primary sector, and I invite CEO Dr. Hudson again to the podium to expound on this for us.
Thank you, sir. I think Ms. Williams would have set the stage for what will happen throughout the sectors in terms of what is expected of parents and teachers and so on. But just to say to you that on September 6th, 44 of our primary schools across the country will be reopening fully. And that is fundamentally based upon space they could actually accommodate our children observing the COVID-19 protocol. So 44 of them will be reopened fully. Another 413, which would have included 9 annexes, will be operating on a rotational basis. I want to single out grade 6 in particular. We have made the move for grade 6 because of the nature of the class, and it's an examination class. They will be attending school in most cases for the entire week, every day. And of course, they will be, as Ms. Waldron made mention of the fact that they will be working with the consolidated curriculum at the level of grade 5. And so safety first, safety in the middle, safety at the end, and that is why we have the rotational system. I just want to say that what we are saying to you here in terms of the functioning of the schools was not an imposition from the Ministry of Education on those schools. Schools actually told us how they think that they could function, how they think that they could operate, because it would be remiss of us to tell schools what to do and we don't have all the facts, we're not on the ground, we don't understand their own idiosyncrasies and so on. And so this is what they would have said to us, and we have checked this out on several fronts. The Assistant Chief in Education Officer Inspectorate has been doing a tremendous job in terms of gathering data and giving us the data as the schools fed the data to the various departments of education. So we intend to move in this rotation fashion for the other schools. And for example, I have a list here. This is Region 5, and all the schools in Region 5, and this will be thrown up shortly, so parents could have access to information, so people could know that we have information that could help them when they want to make decisions and so on. So Region 5 actually would have submitted the data, all the regions, but I have 5. Here on me right now for each school, what is going to be happening, which grade is going to be going to school on Monday or Tuesdays, and so on throughout the entire region. So when that information is placed on the website, the Facebook ministry's Facebook page, the learning channel, and the different modes of communication we have, parents could see, so we would minimize, if not altogether, not create any kind of confusion. Because we wouldn't want schools, and we've considered that, schools to be crowded, everybody rush to the school, and we don't have the kind of personnel there to man the school and so on. So that's why this breakdown was done, so that parents will know that you don't need to come to school today, you come to school on Tuesdays or Wednesdays and so on. So we could have some order in the way we do things. So I just wanted to say that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hudson. And lastly, I will call on the ACO Secondary, Ms. Junan Gonzalez, to explain to us what will be happening in the secondary sector.
All protocols will be observed. Good afternoon, everyone. Secondary education is an important period in every person's life. It serves as a means to potentially empower boys and girls by equipping them with lifelong learning, which will serve as a means to raise their economic status by increasing their chances of employment. At this juncture, I am pleased to inform parents, teachers, stakeholders, and the general public that secondary schools will be reopened, as was stated by our Honorable Minister of Education and Chief Education Officer, for face-to-face interaction. For each of the secondary schools across the country, there are individual plans which were crafted by the school's administration in collaboration with their PTA associations and the regional democratic councils, and our Chief Education Officer would have made reference to that just now. At the secondary level, two modalities will be utilized for the reopening of schools, which vary across the country and across regions based on the school's location, capacity, enrollment, and the number of teachers on the teaching staff. As such, 7 of our secondary schools will be reopened for all grade levels on the 6th of September, while the remainder, 126, which is inclusive of our PICs, will be on a rotational basis. The options to be used, like at every other level, will be shared on the ministry's website, since an individualized plan for schools was created, as I would have mentioned. It is compulsory that students from grades 9 to 13 to attend face-to-face sessions to ensure that there is coverage for the examination curriculum, completion of all SBAs, and completion of SCCP and CVQ practicums. At this time, I wish to inform the nation at large that all plans have taken into consideration the protocol established by the Ministry of Education in collaboration with the Ministry of Public Health for the safety of all students, teachers, and school administrators and auxiliary staff. The secondary sector will continue to work with all schools and regional systems to monitor and provide the necessary support required for the maintenance of a safe and secure learning environment for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gonzalez. Thank you, everyone at the head table, for giving us an understanding of what the nation can expect as we reopen the schools on the 6th. At this time, we open the floor for questions from the members of the media, and as usual practice, state your name, media house you represent, and pose a question. Now, we have a mic that will be moving around, so just indicate by raising your hand if you have a question to ask. Tandika at the back, you have one? Okay.
Good day. Tandika Percival from Stabrook News. Do excuse me if... The ACO nursery mentioned that in relation to the nursery learners returning, there will be a ratio of 1 teacher to 5 learners. Are there similar set in stone ratios across the primary and secondary level?
the plans were requested, we asked that the social distancing be taken into consideration that is required and mandated by the Ministry of Health. So it wouldn't be set in stone. The nursery has a little bit of a different consideration. Even if 10 children can fit, the professionals do not want 10 children in the classroom because they believe the children regarding their ages, having regard to their ages, and other peculiar things with young children, a teacher could only deal with 5 at the same time and deliver education. It's a little bit different for primary schools. If you're grade 6 and you're 12 years old, the teacher doesn't need to fix your mask. She doesn't need less children. But we do have considerations about social distancing. So it's going to be different for schools across the different grades. Nursery has a fix of 5 per teacher because of the peculiarities with the mask wearing and so on.
The average ratio of student to teachers at the primary and the secondary level?
So the fixed ratio, if you're talking about ratio generally or ratio in the COVID time?
Generally, and if it's different during COVID time, the average ratio.
20 at the lower grades, 25 mid, and 35 at the secondary level.
Okay. All right. Does anyone else have another question? I don't want to hog it if that. Okay. 35 per teacher, and taking into consideration some of the space consideration in certain schools, are there any particular or specifics being done for those that, say, for example, that have closed classrooms and have 35 students and 1 teacher in that classroom? Are there specific situations being put in place to deal with that?
So it's unlikely that 35 children will be fitting into a classroom and social distancing. So you're unlikely to see 35 children. What I gave you just now was a general, non-COVID type of a classroom environment, teacher-student ratio. As it stands right now, you're unlikely to be able to fit 35 children in the classrooms that we built in this country for non-COVID times and still maintain the distancing. So that's why you'll see very different times and dates. So you might see grade 1 to come out on Monday, not grade 1, grade 7 or grade 8, that's second form, and grade 9 to come out on Tuesday. So what would happen is the second forms would be split across the entire level of the block. So you have less children in the classroom with teachers teaching them. The timetable that we publish, well, not a timetable. The schedule we publish will cater for the social distancing.
Brings me back to my original question. Is there a number, when you split those classes, is there a number that you're working with that's acceptable, within the classrooms that we have in Guyana?
No, but you're doing 2 things. You're conflating 2 things. You're conflating the requirement for nursery that Samantha, the ACO nursery, explained or gave, as well, and asking us to do that for secondary. Nursery children, it doesn't matter what space we have. We have space in most nursery classes for more than 5 with 6 feet between them. We are using 5 because the nursery aged children are too small. So if you put 10 children, although 10 children can fit, the teacher fixing mask, not fixing mask, and attending to them almost on a one-on-one basis because they're the limited hours they're engaging with an educator requires less students. In some high schools, you'll be able to fit 15 children in a class and get the social distancing, and some you'll be able to fit 10. So it's not going to be standard for high schools. There's no teacher-student ratio except that we don't cross the 35. for the purpose of delivery of education. It would be specific to the purpose of maintaining the social distance.
This number will be decided by each school.
The number has been, we have it in our possession, we'll throw it up shortly after this, has been decided by the schools, along the schools administration, along with the PTAs or boards, because some the high schools mainly have boards, as well as the regional education departments. So you might see at Queen's College saying our grades 10, 11, 12, 13 will come out every day, but from Monday to Friday we're going to rotate between grade 7, 8, and 9. So grade 7 will come out 2 days and be online for 3 days. Grade 8 will come out 2 days. But then you might see a Christchurch, which might be smaller, same community, same Georgetown region, that says we're going to bring out our grade 10 and 11 and only half of another grade every day. So depending on the space.
Thank you.
That they have.
Good afternoon, Vishani from the newsroom. A few questions, I'll just pose them all at once. As it relates to the consolidated curriculum and the diagnostic assessment that was mentioned, is this something that already has buy-in from teachers, or is this something that's now being taken to teachers? And is that going to remain for education? I don't know, is it just for the recovery period, or is it going to just be there forever and ever perhaps? And also, you spoke a lot about learning loss, recovery. A lot of the efforts were geared towards that, but have you given any attention to sort of meeting the psychosocial needs of children who might have been exposed to some sort of hardship during the pandemic period and are returning to schools now?
Right. So two things. One, the diagnostic assessment. So if I could just summarize what the table said. When we get back into schools, we're going to first, before we begin any learning and teaching, have a diagnostic assessment. Two. One aimed at determining what you need to know, because we want to do it positively and not what you don't know. Essentially where you are academically, so that we know where to begin from. And the other one is a wellness diagnostic, which is aimed at your psychosocial. How do you feel about coming back? Are you afraid of this? Do you feel like you need to be home? Are you having separation anxiety issues depending on how old the children are and so on? And a diagnostic on the wellness of children. Once we have that, we will then use the consolidated curriculum so if a child is going into grade 4, for example, we don't go into grade 4 on September the 6th and start teaching grade 4 work as though this child did not miss the whole of grade 3, because they did miss the whole of grade 3. This morning I met a young child. He's going into grade 2. So which school are you going to? So he said, he hesitated and he said, I'm going into grade 2. Very clear about that. So I said, which school are you going to? And he couldn't answer me. And it wasn't shyness. The reason he can't answer me is because he didn't go to school for grade 1. So he doesn't know his new school's name. He's never gone into his primary school. He missed the whole year. And those are very telling graphic pictures of what really happened here. So if you're going into grade 4, you actually missed the last term of grade 2 and the whole of grade 3. I don't know if people realize that. A child going into grade 4 in September missed the whole of grade 3 and the last term of grade 2. So when you go into grade 4, we can't begin teaching as though you did not miss this time. We're going to begin, well, first check to see where the child is, and we have to appreciate that each classroom will be different, because different people engaged differently during the time that the school doors were closed, and begin with grade 3 work, and then move you up to grade 4 work. And then when you go into grade 5, begin with grade 4 work and move you up to grade 5 work. And when you get into grade 6, begin the grade 5 work and take you through there, and that's where we're stopping. The testing for grade 6 is stopping at a grade 5 level for the next 2 to 3 years, depending on how our assessments go. So that's the summary of what we said here. We also said that each level, nursery, primary, and secondary, have individualized plans that came from the schools themselves, working together and in collaboration with their PTAs and boards to determine how best we can engage students. And that this all begins on the 6th of September, either face-to-face or with other means. For secondary education, we are going to go back to schools as the vaccination plan is rolled out. So we don't have to, if the Leg 1 secondary school is vaccinated, they can get back into school almost immediately. They don't have to wait until Queen's College is vaccinated or until St. Rose's High is vaccinated. So we will do it on in an individualized basis.
Just for clarity, so the use of the consolidated curriculum and the use of the diagnostic assessment, these are things that teachers have already agreed to do?
Sorry, I didn't answer that. Teachers have not only agreed to do it, these were created by local as well as international staff, and most teachers have been trained or are in the process of being trained for it. So I just want you to hear that. Quinita could actually give you the numbers. This is not something we woke up last week and did. We began drafting and writing these curricula way back when we realized that this was going to be a long haul for us. We had to print it, so an investment was made to actually craft it and then print it. So each grade teacher will have the grade they're in plus the grade before. That's 2 curricula before them. And then the training was rolled out across the country for all primary to grade 9, for all primary teachers, so that when we begin in September, everybody's trained in how to use it. This is not new work, so we haven't introduced new work to teachers. What we have done is dropped off some things that were repetitive or not age appropriate, and so it's work that they're accustomed to teaching. We just had to teach them how to use it. So Quinita could speak, and I'll just have her. This is the director of NSERT, Ms. Waldron Lewis, about how teachers responded or are responding to that.
Okay, thank you. The training on the consolidated curriculum and the come over, just switch over. Yes, the training on the consolidated curriculum has begun to be rolled out nationally. The teachers are, first of all, very appreciative of the fact that it resembles their termly schemes. So planning for that process has been eliminated for them. Of course, they are still required to prepare lesson plans for the academic engagement of the children. They are also very thankful that it is delineated in such a clear way where they have at their fingertips teaching and learning strategies for assessment. So it takes out a lot of the guesswork from the teaching and learning process. And it is so user-friendly that the most novice teacher can pick it up and hit the ground running, whereas a seasoned teacher would know how to be more flexible. So it takes the guesswork away from it. In terms of the diagnostic assessments, the teachers appreciate the fact that they are going to now have an opportunity to interact with their children on a level that immediately jumpstarts that connection and that relationship from the psychosocial and well-being aspect. And the fact that the diagnostic assessment is so student-centered, it gives them also a unique perspective to hear from the students themselves, not just about whether they could add or subtract, but how the children feel about their own skills at being able to do that. So they're now better able to plan for different groups and levels of learners who have competencies in different areas. And it gives them a visual way when they look at the summary sheets of where the different strengths and weaknesses of children lie, and that helps them to plan better for different organized group tasks and activities and assessment.
Hi, good afternoon. Richard Bainey, Guyana Chronicle. Mister, I heard you mention vaccination policy. So my first question would be, what is the plan for unvaccinated students? Will they be able to return to the physical setting? And secondly, in relation to this curriculum, what is the modus operandi in relation to its implementation? And for how long will it run? Is it something that will be temporary? Will it be revisited to be incorporated into the main system, or what is the timeline there? Thank you.
Right, so let me answer your last question first. This is a very, very fluid, versatile kind of situation we're in. We are not in a place right now where we could say for certain that next week we will all be in school, or even that next week we will all be in the same place we're at right now. The virus has been behaving very unpredictable. Well, not really, it's predictable. If people don't get vaccinated, we can predict what will happen. So we're in a very fluid position. We are very certain at this point that we missed a year and a term academically. And that's not easy to catch up in 1 year. So we had a great opportunity to also look. I believe crises bring opportunities if you look for them. And we had a good opportunity to look to see whether our curriculum was still as relevant as it was when it was created 50 years ago. And of course, we found that there were a lot of things that were repetitive and not age appropriate and so on. And that's what we paired off of the 40 weeks. For sure, sir, Richard, you said, right? For sure, this year will be the consolidated curriculum, and the next 2 years, as far as we have been able to map it, to be able to pick up the learning, the loss that we suffered. I ask you to bear in mind, while some schools didn't skip a beat, we closed in March and by April they were online learning, there are some children who didn't see a teacher for the entire year. And that number is probably in the majority, not in the minority. And we have to cater for all those children. Everybody, the children who were taught all year through, and the children who were not taught at all and had to depend on remote learning, worksheets or internet or TV. So we believe this will definitely be happening for the next 3 to 4 years, we think, to be able to catch it up. Like I said, you will be continuously briefed. If we believe we caught this up before then, we'll be sure to let you know. In the meanwhile, we are also revising the curriculum completely, because that was one of our manifesto promises, actually, to revise the curriculum to ensure that we are meeting the needs of Guyana's children today, and the Guyana that we envision. At this stage, to answer your second question, at this stage, or generally, philosophically, we believe classroom doors should never be locked to any child who wants to enter a classroom. That philosophy is a foundation on which we work, but all our foundations have been seriously shaken by this virus. We could do only what we're advised by the Ministry of Health, and at this point, they're uncomfortable with social gathering or any gathering of unvaccinated persons. A school setting is actually a gathering, whole day, every day. And it is my impression at this point that they are uncomfortable with just opening the secondary school doors without rolling this vaccination out. Which is why our mandate at education is not to just open secondary schools. It is to open according to the vaccination plan, how that's rolled out. I think we could read that to mean that we expect that the children who will go into schools will access this vaccine and get it. I wouldn't address any other question further, except to say that as those things arise, I suppose we'll be briefed on them about what would be healthy and not healthy.
Hi, good afternoon, Minister. Joseph Allen from News Source here.
Okay.
So, Minister, are you saying that we will not cater for students that are unvaccinated correctly?
No, I didn't say that at all. I said at this point, we have acquired vaccines for all the students and children under 18 in Guyana, and we hope that they will access those vaccines, because we will go school to school and community to community to deliver, not we, the Ministry of Health, to administer the vaccines, give the shots to the children. Generally, we would like to open school doors anytime, every time, all day, 24 hours a day. But you just saw how the last year and a term, academic year and a term, we had to close our school doors because of an external thing threatening us all. So while our philosophy is to open school doors for anyone who is to come in, it will have to be tempered by how safe that is given the nature of this virus.
Yes. So we will, what about the online learning? Will that be taken away for now?
Absolutely not. I think one of the things we learned in this last year and a half is that the delivery of education can be effective with through a myriad of different means, and that blended learning is something that's here with us to stay. In fact, some of the schools that submitted their schedules said to us very clearly that while grade 7 or grade 8 will be home on this day, they will be engaging with us online. So some schools have built that into their process. Of course, you'd have to have the ability to do that. That is internet access and children who are connected and so on. So we're not taking away online learning at all. In fact, I don't see how teachers who have gotten accustomed to it will just simply remove it from their schedule of delivery.
Final question. Would the diagnostic period, would it fit into the 20-week period? Would it start, after we've diagnosed and know where we're at? Would it start, will teaching actually start on the 20-week period?
So the assessment periods are built into the consolidated curriculum frame. So this would include time for the diagnostic assessment as well as the formative or summative the summative assessment periods, which also would be pretty fluid at the end of the terms. With respect to when is the appropriate start-off point, of course you want to conduct your assessments right at the very beginning. In fact, some schools are fortunate where the teacher and the children live in the same community, so they don't even need to wait until they get back into physical school to start their assessments if they are desirous of doing so. But definitely within the first few weeks of school, you want to begin with your diagnostic assessments. And the way that the assessment is also structured does not mean that you cannot engage your children in meaningful work at the same time. So it doesn't mean that one has to start before the other begins.
So just to let you know, we know of some schools that have already begun, teachers have already brought their children in and are conducting that assessment to see where they are and what they have to do. But I know there's a journalist here that has been trying to raise his hand for the longest while. I don't think they're seeing you. Oh, they're coming? Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Dennis Shabral, Damar Waves News Talk Radio. Minister and team, you've outlined your plans against the background of a threat of some sort of industrial unrest by the teachers' union. In that context, my question is, what is the legal basis for prohibiting teachers from entering the schools if they are not vaccinated or have a negative PCR test? And secondly, in terms of the nursery level, could the ACO nursery say, at a minimum, how many contact hours you actually are expecting between the teachers and the students, in light of the fact that the students are very young? I know you have pointed to those as inherent challenges, but at the end of the day, the reality is that the teachers may still end up being very busy managing those children, although the number is small. So my question is, what is the minimum number of actual beneficial contact hours you expect? And Minister, quickly, as I have the microphone, with your permission, what's your response to information being circulated in some quarters that you had visited the Tutorial High School Marking Center and asked for certain files for certain students to be pulled and delivered to you? Thank you.
So I'll answer the question on the nursery education sector. As I said in the presentation earlier, the minimum contact hours per learner should be 4 hours. And this can be done in 2 ways. Where schools are employing a full-time face-to-face approach, they will be able to do this perhaps on the very first day, a Monday. But where schools are employing the rotation system, this can be done using 2 days, where for each day the child attends school for a minimum 2 hours per day. So to answer your question again, the minimum number of contact hours at the nursery level that we're expecting would be 4 hours per week. We have indicated how that time should be managed and spent. We've given guidance as to what the teachers need to do and the kind of timetable that they should follow in order to be able to provide meaningful engagement. And of course, that timetable would include building early literacy and numeracy skills and the teaching of health and family life education. Thank you.
Right. I'm not even sure how I feel about answering your last question, because I'll say this. It's very easy with the advent of social media, to attack people's character and integrity without any foundation. And I'm always concerned when that happens, because I'm a firm and strong believer that as far as we can, every avenue should be open for people to speak, raise questions, check on their leaders and hold them accountable. But here I have from the mainstream media a reputable journalist, from a journalist I absolutely respect, a question that has no foundation. It doesn't even have a name put to it. So, no, and that's, let me say, I actually feel so appreciative of the fact that someone has put this out in the open now, because I felt a little foolish answering a page that people say is managed by one member of parliament, Mr. Sherrod Duncan, but it can be related to him. The page has a false name. So let's talk about that. The Ministry of Education has always conducted an exit exam at primary. It's the National Grade 6 exam. Some of us know it as Common Entrance. That exam in 2013, 2014, we realized, or we noted something that had been happening for years. The results are all over the place, up, down. So one year students are doing very well in a subject, another year they're doing very poorly. Generally, evaluations do not produce those kinds of results because you have the same conditions, same syllabus, same curriculum, same teachers, same textbooks, same homes, you don't see that kind of variation. And it was determined by professionals in the ministry that the testing was not equal. So the questions were not weighted the same way year after year. And the marking might not have been standardized year after year. As a result of which, we determined that we should engage the Caribbean body, the CXC, Caribbean Examinations Council, which had enormous experience in testing and evaluation, to manage that process for us. We left office, as you know, and so the first year that process was done by CXC was 2016. The examination is set by CXC, it is managed by CXC, it is marked by CXC. Set in Barbados, I think there is an involvement in the country too. Not I think, there is. It's our country people that are used to set it on the exam conditions. It is managed here, so the people who invigilate and supervise are CXC managed and supervised. And the marking is done specifically by CXC. When I came into office last year, two things happened. Well, three things. One, we discovered that children were being unfairly marked down for their age. So, if you're 12-7, you were being penalized for being 12 years, 7 months, only for age, nothing else. That a rounding up of the scores was producing a skewed result, and that for whatever reason, the ministry was leaving space in the top schools. So where QC could hold 130 students, only 120 were being awarded places at Queen's College. Additionally, of the reviews that were conducted last year under my watch, because the exam results, while the exams were written in the previous administration, the results were announced by the PPPC government. I actually announced them. After every exam, there's a review period. And last year, of the reviews requested, 30% had changes in favor of the children. We don't change marks, even if when you're reviewing, you see that a child should not have gotten a mark, that's not changed. The benefit is given to the child. So of that 30% gave children, we talk about percentages here, but these are kids we're talking about, people's lives, more marks than they should have got, than the original process gave them. Some of those changes resulted in children moving from Diamond Secondary to national schools, I believe Queen's College. So much was the variance in the marks. One child got 11 more marks. That led us to a conclusion that whatever was happening at the marking center, and the other odd position was that the scripts were destroyed. So there was no way to go back to a script to see what the variance or why they were there. And that was a new thing implemented by the AP and UAFC government, that the scripts would be destroyed before a 3-year period, almost immediately upon completing the exam. I went to tutorial, which is the marking center, again managed by CXC, and in the presence of, and North Georgetown, and from a stage with a mic at one location and with my own voice at another, implored the markers to pay attention to what they were doing, because it is extremely important that you mark correctly here, because these are children's lives you're playing with. Not PPP children, children of this country, including children of the people who are making those posts. That was openly done. There was no secret meeting. There was no, while I was on stage or off stage, saying, give me a file. I did walk around to say thank you to teachers. Very normal thing for me in the presence of our cameras, rolling cameras. And teachers, no person is in any room by themselves. So I'm coming to how this thing is set up. At no point did I speak to any marker themselves, and that's why anyway, we'll come to that in a minute. The way this is set up is each table has a table leader and 7 people around the table. These tables get scripts. They don't get a collection of scripts to begin with. They get scripts as they are finished marking. The scripts come from CXC to the table. I would have to request, if one were to request a file, they would have to request that file in the presence of everyone, unless they're speaking to someone personally. There is no way, the way this is set up, the accusation, and that is why it is so vague, is not possible. Sitting next to me is one of the chief examiners, and I'm not going to put her on the spot because this is a political issue. It's not a professional issue. For anyone to go in there and demand an exam script, a lot of people would know. Not one person. No one person could get any script from in there. The scripts are held in a place by CXC, is that right? And as the table is finished marking a script, porters hired by CXC take the script over to that table. So the allegation was a political allegation aimed at bringing me and my child into disrepute. So let us face something that we don't, because that's what it's aimed at. While I would like to keep my minor children out of the limelight, and I believe they are entitled to that. They have rights that protect them from that, as do other children in this country. Let us face what is happening here. It is known to the political opposition that my daughter wrote Common Entrance, or the NGSA, as it is known to them that the Chief Education Officer's son wrote Common Entrance. And the attack has been vulgar and inhumane, because you're not attacking adults here, you're attacking children. I came into office after an 8-year process of her education. And I'm not going to subject her to what the opposition is trying to do here. But this is a different level that they've sunken to. We have never attacked people's minor children. Minor children should stay out of the fray and out of the radar of attacks. We took very clear positions. There are 3 officers, if you consider me an officer, of the Ministry of Education who have children who wrote these exams. And the hands-off approach was not known only by the 3 of us, but by everybody in the ministry. And so the ministry is not made up of PPP employees or PNC employees or people who love PRIA alone or people who hate PRIA alone. And everybody could tell you that we were very, very careful in making sure that we were nowhere near the process. I did not mark papers. I went to speak to markers because that is my responsibility. Because for every child who is marked down, for every child who is not awarded the mark they actually earned, is a child we are treating unfairly, poorly, and taking away opportunities from them. And so I didn't have the luxury of reneging on that, because the brand of politician presently in the opposition camp is worthy of only gutter politics. So that will not dictate how I perform. But let us be clear about what that was. It was an attack on my child, and an indication that somehow I am there to cheat to give her grades. Without a single name, without a single table, without any clarity to that allegation that could have it even grounded anywhere near facts. And so, while I thank you for the opportunity to finally address this issue, I also think that as a country we have to take certain stands, and it has to come from everybody, including the press, that people's minor children should not be part of the conversation. I see Coretta McDonald also asking the vague question, I hope this isn't true. She has attacked my father, my husband, now my child, and the only thing left is for her to resurrect my dead mother. And that's fine, if that's the direction she would like to go into. But I do not know whether her or her colleagues have children, husband, father. That's just not one of the directions we will go into, or I will go into. It should be based on policy and policy alone. And so a vague accusation put out there with the sole intent of bringing a child into disrepute should never be entertained by the sane adults in this country. We're seeing a different direction of opposition politics, and they will pay for that separately. And that is their modus. They must decide about that. I don't want to tell them how to behave. But I am saying, in the same way that I will fight for every other child of this country, and people's children have rights, not stemming from who their parent is. The children by themselves and of themselves have rights, and we must respect those rights if we claim to have any love for the children of this country. Go on. I don't remember what it was. So, rights always come with exceptions and responsibilities. So, while there may be a freedom of expression as a human right and guaranteed in our Constitution as a fundamental right, over years it has developed that you cannot use that freedom to hurt other people. For example, the wild accusations, and that's why we have libel laws. So you have a constitution that says you can speak freely, enshrined in that constitution. But you still have laws that said, but if you breach or if you are not respectful of the purpose for that right, and you hurt people using this right, you can get into trouble. And so you can't go into a cinema and shout fire, fire, although you have the right to speak, because it might end up in a stampede that actually costs people their lives and limbs and so on. While we might have rights in the country about how each individual addresses his or her health concerns or conditions, when those individual rights threaten the public health or the health of a large number of public persons, then it becomes the duty of the state to determine how to reconcile those varying rights. On the issue of vaccines, it's a debate around the world, and I don't think it's settled as yet. Is this a deeply personal choice, or is this a public health crisis? Could you exercise your deeply personal choice if it is going to interfere with someone's deep or many other persons' deeply personal choices not to die right now? What becomes the state's duty then? And so I don't believe it's a determined question. A very renowned jurist has made some jurisprudential pronouncements in the region, Rosemary and Belle Antoine. I don't know if you read her opinion pieces, but it's still a debate in the country. The Guyana government has said that to keep the larger public safe, certain categories of persons are asked to get vaccinated or to present negative PCRs so that it is clear that their presentation of themselves to the public would not endanger the public. And that's where we are right now. I have not studied this with particular attention to enough to give you an informed answer here. And I don't speak on behalf of the government as it relates to legal issues. I think you should address that to the Attorney General. And I actually believe he might be in a better position to give you an informed answer. I haven't looked at it with that kind of particularity, and I shouldn't. I think it would be reckless for me to try to answer that in that regard.
Ron Nelson around the regions. With students being out of school this very long, can you say if there will be any psychological support being offered to students who may require some? Looking at the issue of the worksheets, I know your ministry would have invested a lot in worksheets. Can you say what has been the assessment of how effective the worksheet has been, if it has been? And I know the ACO nursery would have spoken about 5 students to 1 teacher. But considering some of the nursery schools, do you think that each school has adequate teachers to look at the 5-to-1 ratio in terms of students there?
Right. So let me answer the 2, and then I'll pass you over to Sam to answer the 3rd. Not only did we do worksheets, let me just say Guyana made one of the better responses. Actually, don't be modest. We gave the best response to school closure. We refashioned the learning channel and created videos for every topic, every subject, and taught according to the curriculum on the channel. We created worksheets, printed them, distributed them in accordance with the curriculum. We taught online. We created quiz websites and booster programs for our exam classes and so on. So much so that other Caribbean countries asked us to borrow some of our material, and we happily gave that. And we're very proud of those efforts. I mean, I didn't write any of these worksheets, but I watched people. I watched people. Samantha Williams is one of them. Konita, Anisha, people work day and night, and I mean that, quietly, without complaint, just getting this done because we knew how many people and how many children depended on us. So I'm very, very proud of those efforts. It really showed us what we're capable of. Even the consolidating of this curriculum was smart, incisive, and an appropriate response. And that took time and effort and strategic planning and thinking and so on. But we learned very clearly in that time that all those efforts, any of those efforts, or even a combination of all, would never replace the value of a teacher in front of the classroom. We learned very starkly how very many children come before us every day in school without parental support. We learned very starkly how disinterested some environments at home are in education. And it restated for us our purpose here, that we must treat every child as though they have an illiterate parent. So the worksheets were a great intervention, and they're not going anywhere. We're actually revising them to make them relevant to the consolidated curriculum. But they can't replace a teacher in front of the classroom at all. The second question was psychological support. That's what the diagnostic assessment is aimed at. It's aimed at getting from the child what they need and how we could address that to make learning possible and this teaching effective. So we don't just go in and start right on the blackboard. I suspect strongly, Raul, that we are going to see a different need arising. How we address that will be dependent on what arises as a need. We will have to work very closely. I had a brief chat with UNICEF yesterday about what might be some support we can get. We know right now that more than 530 children have essentially left the primary school. When they should be going into first form now, they're essentially dropped out, and we are hiring people to go after every single one. Now, I'm pretty sure when we find those children, it wouldn't be just simply a cajoling, come back into school. It's going to have to be fixing a lot of things in their home, psychosocially, to get them back in the classroom. And we're prepared to do that because that's how important it is to them and to us. If we don't, we're dooming them to a life of poverty. We also are aware that high school children did not write CXC and have left prematurely. They too, we are trying to track down and bring back into the formal education system to make sure they leave with skills that make them marketable and employable and produce productive members of our country.
On the question of the ratio 1 teacher to 5 learners and whether or not we have adequate teachers, I can say yes, we do have adequate teachers, because when schools operationalize their individual plan for reopening, they took into consideration the number of teachers they have available to them, the ratio that we would have given in terms of how we want that to be operationalized, and they also took into consideration the available space that they have. Now, every year at the beginning of the academic year, the Ministry of Education and the Teaching Service Commission would engage in what we call a staff rationalization, where we look to see how many teachers would have left the system, whether they would have resigned or they were retired or whatever the reasons may be. And so we go through a process of finding those junior vacancies, as we call them. And so we've already gone through that process. We have submitted to the Teaching Service Commission the junior vacancies that exist in the various regions. And so it is likely that those positions will be filled where we do have vacancies. Additionally, how schools will operationalize their reopening, we will find that a teacher at a particular school, because of the number of learners, may not necessarily be a year 1 teacher only or a year 2 teacher, but the teacher will become a teacher of the school. And so when the year 1 children are at school, the teacher will be asked to work with 5 of those children. Similarly, when the year 2 children are at school, they do the same thing.
Kendall Richmond, Nightly News. We saw Trinidad and Tobago recently linked one of its Delta variant cases to travel from Guyana. Yeah. Considering the fact that we know that the Delta variant has adverse effects on children, and there aren't any vaccines presently authorized for use for children below the age of 12, is the ministry sure that the measures you have in place can keep our nursery school students and primary school students safe in the event that the Delta variant is actually here?
The decision to reopen schools at all levels was based on international studies that say we need to. If you notice, UNICEF, the United Nations, which is really the premium body on these issues, has welcomed the reopening of schools, and they are fully aware of the variants and so on. Our own professionals and the assessments done across the country say we really, really need to get back into school, as well as the call by parents, the call of parents and teachers to get back in the classroom. Delta isn't going anywhere. Sorry, not Delta. COVID isn't going anywhere. And in fact, if we continue not to take the vaccine, you'll have more than Delta. You'll have other variants arising too, because that's how variants come about. They become the host in some unvaccinated person and they spread. We then have a choice to make. Do we keep schools closed forever, knowing fully well that this will doom a lot of lives to poverty, and not lives alone, a lot of generations? Because if we have a 10-year-old now who can't go to school, then her children and possibly her grandchildren are also doomed to a life of poverty. And so it's very important that we balance safety and practicality and access to vaccines. And that's why I didn't want to give a definitive answer just now about whether this is, I believe that larger public rights must trump private rights in these circumstances. I personally hold that view. So we have this situation. We know from scientists and medical people that if you wear masks, sanitize, and stay relatively distanced, you could prevent the spread and contraction of the virus. So we have to balance staying out of school and being entirely, or being, I don't want to say stay safe, staying out of school and avoiding the responsibility of a child who becomes ill, because that's all we're doing. Frank Anthony, the Minister of Health, said to you very clearly that over the last year, 4,000 children contracted the virus. Over the last year, we have been closed for schools. So they didn't get it from the school. They got that from home and parents and communities. So if we keep schools closed, it's because we want to take the easy way out. And easy is always nice. So don't trust me when I say it's very tempting to say we now open these schools. Therefore, we will never have to answer nightly news's very informed reporter about why a child gets sick. We don't have the luxury of doing what's easy right now. Leadership requires decisions that are in the best interest of the people you swore to serve. And sometimes that will come with risk. And one of the risks is that a child whose parent did not get vaccinated and was careless at a party last night infects that child, and that child brings it into the classroom. And that's why we have to make sure we're distanced, wearing masks, sanitizing. So is there a risk that that could happen? There's a possibility. But we have to minimize that as a country. Parents have to get vaccinated. Teachers need to get vaccinated. Reporters need to get vaccinated. Ministry officials need to get vaccinated. Your church members that you're going to pray with on Sunday need to get vaccinated. So we really need to be responsible as a people. That question could be a question that is obsolete. You don't have to ask me that if everybody who is an adult behaved responsibly. in this country. So I'm just forcibly bringing you to a position. What is easier for us to do? It was easier for all of us to turn up here and tell you there's a thing called Delta. It's attacking children. It might kill some, frighten everybody into a corner. So we therefore have to keep these school doors closed because we want to avoid the responsibility that could land at our doorstep. That is the easiest thing for us to do. It profits us in no way. It gives us nothing personally here. In fact, everybody's work becomes a lot easier if we keep the school doors closed. It gives us nothing to open these schools. But it's the right thing to do. And it's necessary at this point. And those of us who believe in a higher being and God and so on, we have to believe that it would be wrong in His eyes if we didn't do what's right. And so we're doing this, and we're trying to do it safely and carefully. We're also saying to parents, though, that whether you send your child is a choice you have to personally make. In these particular circumstances, the Ministry of Education will not be engaging its truancy officers to go behind children who didn't come to school. What we will try to do is to ensure if parents decide they want to keep their children home for their own peculiar reasons, we're going to respect that, and we're going to try very hard to make sure those children are engaged. But we are leaving the door open and the option to parents who do not wish to send their children to school. We're leaving that option open to them. I want to raise with you that I saw the opposition, very reckless opposition. You know, it pains me that I'm currently sharing on my page the opposition leader in Trinidad and Tobago calling on children to get vaccinated and parents to take their children, and our opposition leader here stands up with the vaguest notion of what he speaks of and does everything he can to discourage people from taking the vaccine, while he himself and those that he loves have taken the vaccine. It's unconscionable, it is irresponsible, it is inhumane, it is cowardly. We need here, we can't, so I saw the opposition saying, Priya said you could stay home and homeschool. Education is a right. It is. It was a right in the 5 months that the PNC, AP and UAFC locked schools and gave nothing to children also when they were trying to steal the government. But we don't have capacity and teachers to both teach children face-to-face and go and teach children online. If we did, we'd be happy to offer that service. And where we can, because there may be 1 or 2 schools where we can offer that, we will do that. But it would be wrong of us to say to parents that keep your children home, we'll give them online classes, when we know fully well that we're unable to deliver that. So it's not as though we don't want to do it. We would like to engage children fully if they stay home, but we don't have the capacity for that here. And indeed, many countries in the world, including developed countries, do not have the capacity for that. So if parents choose the option of staying home or keeping their children home, they will then have the responsibility to make sure those children are academically engaged. Not because we're washing our hands of the children, but because we don't have the capacity to do anything else at this stage.
Saskia Warwick, NCN. Minister, with school reopening fully or with the rotational system, is this plan only for public schools, or is it the same plan for private schools? And also, it was mentioned that there are going to be weekly feedback sessions with the nursery level. Is it going to be the same with primary and the secondary level with parents?
So, to answer you, the private schools were trying very hard. Again, something that was my vision, that private schools must be fully integrated into the education system. We have a private school unit that has 1 single person, so it wasn't advanced at all in the 5 years, that vision to integrate fully. So the private schools have all submitted their own plan too. The private schools cannot be allowed to do what they feel like doing. If a private school has 700 children and they have no space, the Ministry of Health wants to see the same plan for those children, even if their parents consent. And that's why, to answer Mr. Chabrol's question, private rights versus public rights. This is a perfect example. A private school says you can all come into this classroom, all 50 of you, but there will be no social distancing. 3 of you will sit on a bench. And a parent says, I'm prepared to do that for my child. Should a state turn a blind eye to that because the parent exercised their private option, private right, to determine how their child should be schooled, or will it become a public health issue? Those are some of the questions that have to be reconciled. So the private schools have to follow the plan to social distance, mask up, sanitize. And when they submit that plan, many of them have already, we'll then have a look at it to see if that complies with what the Ministry of Health demands of us in the public sector. On the engagement with parents, bear in mind, nursery children are very different. So you could help them to strengthen their muscles as a parent. Like you could actually make roti dough and have them play with it at home. To ask a grade 6 parent to come in so that we could instruct them how they could instruct their children, very different matter. Very different matter. So the involvement becomes more a parental one at that level rather than a teaching one. I suspect strongly that we want more parental involvement. We're absolutely certain we want more parental involvement in the country, but it's not going to happen like this. The nursery children, if parents don't pay attention, they won't get what we need them to get in these 2 to 4 hours a week. And that's why we need the parents to come in. But it's more things that parents can be instructed to do. Like we're not necessarily going to teach you how to teach phonics, but the other skills, small motor muscles and so on, we can help parents with helping their children to develop those. So when we get back into the classroom, we're writing and so on. Finish? Okay. God, I don't even know if I should have, like, I just do not know, but it's out there. Yeah. Hmm?